everyone. We are, as ever, the good doctors of Abbey Research. Dr. Erin with you.
Dr. Kristen.
And we are back talking about the Netflix limited series Unbelievable.
Which is unbelievably good.
Which is unbelievably amazing. Pun intended. And we're here to talk about the second episode in the series. And in our first video, we kind of chronicled what was important about episode 1, which was in its entirety just about the original rape and assault against a woman named Marie. We jumped very quickly in episode 2 to 3 years later in Golden, Colorado, where a detective, Karen Duvall, is called to a sexual assault case. And very quickly in the episode, we come to see that this is probably the same rapist, if not the same, certainly, MO as Marie's rapist. And it goes then for the rest of this episode and the rest of the season, goes back and forth in time between 2008 in Linwood, Washington, and 2011 in Colorado. So that's the gist of this episode, is kind of learning the details of this case in Golden, Colorado, which, for those of you that don't know, I am from Colorado, but Golden is about 20 miles west of Denver, southwest of Denver, in towards the mountains.
And the home of Coors, right?
And the home of Coors Light, which they drink all the time in the show. And I'm like, did Coors pay you to do this? Because I don't think that many people. Colorado, for those of you also that don't know, is an exceptionally great craft beer state. And
even in 2011?
Even then, like, Colorado's been in this craft beer game for a while.
Okay.
But like, even if they weren't, do people really drink Coors Light? Like, do people out there really drink Coors Light? I don't know.
I mean, the sales of Budweiser continue to baffle me. So, I mean, like, we are not the target audience. So.
I digress. Yes, Golden, Colorado, the home of Coors Light, and the home of this second rape case involving this young woman named Amber, who is played delightfully by the girl from the Netflix movie Dumplin'.
Who, you may not know this, is Australian.
And her American accent
is impeccable.
Is unbelievable. We're just going to keep using that word until it becomes obnoxious. But for me, the most powerful part of this whole second episode, and Dr. Kristen and I have talked about this offline already, is that I think what they really wanted to show you between the first episode and the second episode was the complete opposite end of the spectrum that you can have in terms of how a rape case is reported, how it is investigated, how the victim or survivor is dealt with, how they are talked to, the language that is used, the way that that situation is approached. And I think they did that on purpose. And we will link to an article below that I found with Susanna Grant, who's one of the show's co-creators, writers, and directors. And she talks about when she was writing these episodes and they were talking to Netflix, Netflix told them that the data that they have on their viewers is that most people watch 2 episodes at a time.
Which is interesting.
Which is really interesting. So she kind of thought of the first episode and the second episode as like a 2-hour chapter, just told in separate chunks, which will make me think about like the next, like, episodes 3 and 4, and if we can draw correlations between them as well. But I think certainly for me, that was the most impactful thing to see on the back of the first episode, in which literally they did everything wrong that they could have done in terms of how they treated Marie and how they investigated her rape versus how particularly Karen Duvall, but everybody else treated Amber and her situation. It was, I just kept going like, oh my gosh, they're being so empathetic. They're being so agency forward, and all, you know, it's kind of what you would, the dream team of what you would hope if you knew anybody that went through something like that.
And the thing that stuck out to me immediately was the normalcy of this series. I love that people's hair has flyaways and their bras don't fit right and the clothes aren't tailored, and like that may sound really strange, but for those of us who live in the real world, it's constantly like, oh my gosh, you know, professional women who look immaculate all the time, whereas most professional women I know, by the end of the day, our hair looks like static balls because we're like running around. So it just felt really, and then also to have a larger woman be the second survivor of this assailant we don't know the body chemistry or of the real life victims. We haven't been able to track that down. So this could be a casting decision, or it could be a mirror of real life. If it's a casting decision, I want to add even more applause to the creative team of this show, because one of the biggest myths of sexual assault is that the sexual assault is about sex, which even in a fetishization situation, which Amber is in, and we see that in the second episode, sexual assault is never about sex. And if you are interested more in this conversation about serial rape and serial offenders, we'd encourage you to watch Mindhunter, because they really get into, especially the second half of season 1, the mentality and the connection between violence and sex for a lot of these offenders and what that looks like. But
it's a lot more about power and control than it ever is about sexual attraction in the way that we tend to think of it.
Yeah. And even in date rape scenarios where somebody is with somebody they are attracted to, the act of rape itself is, again, about power and control and not about attraction. So to have somebody who is conventionally deemed as unattractive by the world, conventionally said that her body is wrong to be seen as a sexual object, to have her be the first Colorado survivor was very powerful to me. And a really, again, just proving like the people that created the show know what they're doing.
Yeah, because there's so many ways in which they want you to see that there is no one type of rape victim or survivor. There is no type or one way of dealing with it. And that's the other really stark thing that amazed me, that I thought they handled so well, was that the differences between Amber and Marie and how they processed the trauma of what happened to them. And Marie clearly is disassociative and anxious and seems withdrawn, appears withdrawn in the way she's processing the trauma. But Amber, like, her fight or flight response was to be super detail oriented. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it is. There are as many different responses to trauma as there are survivors of trauma. And that, for me, was so impactful to show that, like, there's no one way that this happens. There's no one way that people look. There's no one way that people remember or respond. Any way that a person responds or looks is normal. That is what is normal, is anything is possible. Yeah. And making assumptions and making decisions based off those biases and preconceived notions, you get into the trouble that Detective Parker gets to in the first episode. And if you don't make those assumptions or have those preconceptions, you end up like Detective Duvall, who also clearly, it appears, has had sexual assault training. They don't explicitly state that, but there are a lot of cues in the language that she uses and the way that she talks to Amber and deals with her throughout the entire ordeal, that she has actually been trained in this, not that she's just naturally more empathetic or understanding of what's happening.
Which, again, will just, like we did with Olivia Colman in The Crown, we will forever heap praise upon the three main women of this story: Merritt Weaver, Caitlin Deaver, and Toni Collette. Please give them all the accolades,
all the awards, all the praise.
They are doing their job and more. So my final thing is, I'm going to come in here as like authentic marriage cop. I was really, really grateful to see the interactions between Karen and her husband. How he completely trusts her, is clearly not intimidated by her brilliance or that she outranks him in the police system. He is just raising their kids and is not like trying to get extra credit for it because he's a dude. Like,
I think one of the best scenes of this episode is when she's clearly talking to him on the phone about their daughter who is like has a fever or whatever, and she was like, okay, and he was like, I believe I said okay.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I already said yes.
Yeah. But we can cover this again. Yeah. And again, as women, professional women in our 30s, there's not a lot of marriages on television that we get to see. Either heterosexual or homosexual, where the partners are equally respected to each other, regardless of external things. The last time I remember feeling this way about the first scene of a couple was Coach and Mrs. Coach on Friday Night Lights. Coach and Mrs. Coach. So Authentic Marriage Cop, that felt really lived into me. And so much of this show, that's the word I would use. This is lived in. These are people. They are not characters. And before you say like, well, of course they are, because they're real people, please remember how many real life stories we have sat through where all we did was watch a parade of characters. So this is this is a really grounded representation of a lot of people's stories. And I'm really glad that the creators took the time that they needed to tell the story properly.
Yeah. And so we end the episode with the discovery from Karen, from her husband, who works in Westminster, which is another suburb of Denver, about 15 miles away from Golden, that a detective in the Westminster PD also has a similar sounding rape case. And we get introduced to Grace Rasmussen, played by the
Queen,
fantastic Toni Collette, and thus sets up the major arc for this series, limited series, is the investigation into these rapes and assaults in Colorado and what's happening to Marie. So we'll see what continues to happen with these trio of fantastic characters and these amazing actors and these horrific stories in episode 3.
And we'll see you then, guys.
Bye.
Bye.